one of my early projects, I won't say the name of the show, but one of the editors on there was just my first day coming in was like, oh, a Black woman can never cut this show. Just so matter-of-factly. And it kind of just like, crushed my confidence, but also pushed me a little bit to be like,
screw you, buddy.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know why you would think that, but I'm going to prove you wrong.
Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us. We're really honored to have you on the webcast.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Can you share your journey from being an assistant editor to full picture editor? Maybe tell us some of the key milestones.
Sure. So my very first assistant editing job was a night assistant editing job on a documentary. I didn't know that editing was a career path I could follow. I didn't know that was even something possible. So when I had dabbled a little bit with it when I was younger, but when I got this job as a night assistant editor, I was like, this is so much like what I was doing when I was younger, and I had no clue. The editor on that documentary, Ben Meyer, who's just amazing. We hit it off, and he once that project was wrapping, he recommended me to another post house called Fancy Film in Silver Lake. They do a lot of finishing, just color, sound, all of that, but they also have documentaries and other projects that come and edit in-house. So I was basically on staff there at Fancy Film for a couple years as an assistant editor. And I'm actually really glad that I got started on the finishing side of things, because I feel like that gave me kind of more technical knowledge of some things, and like deliverables and all of that I thought was just super helpful. And aside from that, I was able to also kind of get mentored by a lot of the editors that were there editing different documentaries at the time. And so I was there for a couple of years. They would, from time to time, there were different kind of like corporate videos or industrial videos that needed to be edited that would come through Fancy Film. And I would always just be like, can I touch any of these? And they would, they would let me, I started cutting some of those, which I just really enjoyed because they're all so different. And I was like, oh, it's a chance to edit anything. And so after I had done several of those, and I just kind of wanted to branch out more from just assistant editing, I think I had a conversation with my boss there, Bill McCumber, who owns Fancy Film. And I was just saying, I really think I need to spread my wings a little bit. I really want to be sure that I can edit, not just corporate videos, but I wanted to also edit, documentaries or any long form programs that I could. And he was like, we have a documentary that's coming in. It's about Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner's 2,000-Year-Old Man.
Wow.
I love Mel Brooks so much and Carl Reiner so much that I was like, if there's any chance, I would love the opportunity to be able to work on this. And it was with producers that we had worked with over the past couple of years. So I had kind of already a rapport with them, which was nice. So that project came in and I worked on that. It was a blast. It was just amazing working with that, just with footage like that, and, interviews where Mel Brooks is interviewing Carl Reiner and vice versa was so fun, and all of these different comedians
amazing.
talking about that sketch and how much it meant to them in their career in comedy. So it was just a really just a cool first television editing credit was this documentary about Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner. And from there, I was like, I just had the bug. I was like, I have to keep doing this, and I just was able to kind of, just based on the leverage of having that credit and having the experience or the prior experience of cutting those sort of industrials or corporate videos or anything that had come through, I had the initial toolkits to keep going. I was able to, get another editing job on another documentary and just kind of kept working my way up from there.
So let me ask you, Hollywood is, or certainly when I started out, it was an old boys club. And, did you have any reticence or was there any kind of like feeling that a young Black woman would like never be able to break into this industry? Or what was your mindset when you were starting out?
I think it didn't dawn on me right away because I had such an amazing support system within Fancy Film and with all of the productions that I had worked on up until that point. But once I was kind of out and about and trying to find other work, it occurred to me that like every single editor that I had ever met was like a white man, and
Yeah,
every project that I did end up on with other editors, I was the only person that was not a white man, and there was one of my early projects, I won't say the name of the show, but one of the editors on there was just my first day coming in was like, oh, a Black woman could never cut this show. Just so matter of factly. And it kind of just like, crushed my confidence, but also pushed me a little bit to be like,
screw you,
I
buddy.
yeah, I was like, I don't know, I don't know why you would think that, but I'm going to prove you wrong. And a lot of, as weird as it is to say, I think a lot of projects and things that I've kind of pushed myself towards has been kind of like, I can do this. I'll prove to you that I can do it, And so I've had a lot of like weird comments like that over the years, but I think I kind of just
Strange.
try to use it. Yeah, just try to use it to kind of fuel me to keep going, I guess.
It really must have taken a mindset of persistence and, like you're saying, just not let it hold you back, and that's really admirable. And
Yeah, I think and also, it took like maybe 10 years before I met another Black editor. So I think it was not only just kind of like the trying to prove people wrong mindset, but I was also just like, if I'm the only one, I need to especially prove that we're out here, that this is possible. And
yeah,
this,
absolutely.
yeah, this is an industry that we should all be in.
What skills and qualities do you think are essential for an assistant editor to have to become a full editor?
I think a sense of story is really important. Aside from just understanding, obviously, like the software and understanding kind of the ins and outs of what happens on the post side, so much of what we do is story related. So much of our job is collaborating and being able to be like, on the page, this story looks like this. Footage wise, it might not exactly convey that. How can we, shift things around to try to match what the intention is on the page? So to me, I think like a skill that's really helpful for an assistant editor is just that like understanding collaboration and understanding story, and maybe understanding how to kind of solve problems, maybe solve issues that might arise if the footage doesn't totally match, and figuring out solutions to make it match tonally at least.
Yeah, sure. But they do have to know the technical end. I mean, obviously that's going to be
Mhm.
critical because the assistant job has become so much more about like, managing metadata and things like that, even more so than when we worked on 35 millimeter film, right?
Definitely. And also just the like proactiveness is so valuable in an assistant editor if it's, seeing, oh, here's a needle drop in this script, like making sure that things are maybe there before the editor realizes they need them. It's almost like thinking a few steps ahead because really,
Anticipating, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And also just to me, I always try to, if I'm solving problems or trying to figure out how to make something work, I try to involve my assistant editors as much as I can. So
That's
just
great.
maybe an assistant editor quality that's great is just someone who's willing to like learn and listen when those things happen. Because once they're in the chair, they'll be doing the same thing and hopefully teaching their assistant editors as well.
Yeah, and have you noticed, or I'm sure you have, like when an assistant is really into it, versus an assistant who kind of like is looking at this as like a job, quote unquote. You just kind of can't have that mindset as an assistant. I mean, it's really a coveted role, as demanding and miserable as it can be sometimes. You got to just want to be a filmmaker. You got to want to be an editor, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I've had a couple assistant editors who didn't want to edit. They just were happy and wanted to be assistant editors, but they also just loved the job. They were still there and showed up and just were so involved day in and day out. So yeah, it is like that, just a desire to make something great and to understand that you're part of that story, that
Yeah.
you're part of what the finished product is, and understanding why that role is so important. Because
Yeah.
the assistant editor is that's like the unsung hero of post, I feel like. So
Yeah. Kind of like the hub of the wheel, people used to say. What are some of the most valuable lessons you learned as an assistant that you might even still apply today?
the proactivity was a huge thing for me, just knowing and anticipating what your editors might want from you. That's something that I think I learned early on in fancy film days, where I was like, you know what? I'm going to make sure that every single day I have this and this and this ready. I'm going to make sure that I'm on top of everything. If there's an email, like, I will be on top of it. So I think those were kind of skills as an AE that I really, that I learned, but also that I valued a lot. And also, I think just understanding that collaboration is important. There were a lot of great editors in my fancy film days. Christoph Bodden is a great documentary editor, and I feel like he really took me under his wing and was like, every day would kind of talk about different like aspects of the story, or what he felt like was working, or even if he was just venting about something one day. Like, he was very open with kind of like sharing different things. Same with Bill McCumber at Fancy Film. They were all so like just open and willing to share and teach me things. Like, if I felt like I didn't understand something, or if like they said something and you could see that I didn't totally get, understand yet what it was, or if it was something super technical, they were always like just there to help me learn and to like help me flourish, I guess, in post. So I think those are the things that I really learned as an assistant editor, was just that collaboration and that proactivity, and
That's priceless. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
and just
priceless when you get people like that.
yeah, and understanding kind of the dynamic between an editor and an assistant editor, because I think a lot of times it can be some situation where you don't talk to. I've seen situations where like the assistant editor does something, the editor does something, and they don't totally interact. But I think there's so much value, and it makes the job so much more enjoyable the more you collaborate with your assistant editors.
How important is networking in post? And what advice would you give aspiring assistant editors about networking?
For me, I always feel awkward to network, if I'm being honest, and I think a lot of us in post, like, that's not we're behind the scenes. But it is so important, I think, to develop different relationships. And a lot of times for me, I feel like the networking that works is like just building organic friendships with people. I always feel awkward at networking events or at these sort of like public events, but if you're able to kind of meet different people who might have something in common with you, and you are like, oh, let's hang out and do this thing, it feels like a lot more of a natural thing. So I think the thing that I've learned the most about just networking and whatnot is like, you're going to be working alongside a lot of these people for so many years and decades even, and it's important to just build like authentic friendships, and not necessarily like, oh, I want to work with this person, let me bug this person because of whatever reason. I think it's good to just be like, this is someone who is on my level. It's good to network across. You don't have to network upwards, just network with people around you, meet friends and folks around you.
Yeah. Yeah, Scott Jacobs, a really successful assistant that I know, he talked about just, especially when you're starting out, just asking someone out for coffee, for advice, and I think that's a great way to build those kind of organic relationships. You're not necessarily asking for a job per se, but you just want to get to know each other. You want them to get to know the kind of person you are. And so I love that. Yeah, just sort of building those more authentic kind of relationships.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's, it makes it much more fulfilling too, because I don't know, I love hanging out with people and going and doing things with my friends, but when they're organically built friendships, it just feels great.
Better. Yeah. So you've worked on a lot of amazing stuff. What's the most challenging project that you've worked on?
Ooh, that's a good question. um, I think they're all challenging in different ways. Um, like I've worked on some documentaries that were particularly challenging. There's one Supervillain, the making of Takashi 69. And the reason that was challenging was because the story was unfolding as we were editing it.
Hmm.
And this was also like very this was done remotely. This project, it was like beginning of COVID era that we worked on this. And so it was trying to like every day I would come in, I would check like Instagram to see if he had posted anything, and if he had, we would bring that into the Avid. Um,
Wow.
just every day, just tracking this story and seeing how it was going to unfold, and like knowing where the story began and where it might end, and like maybe it'll end totally differently than we than we thought it
Yeah.
would. Those kinds of projects can be challenging, but I think really like rewarding in the end when you're like, okay, we figured this out, and it came together. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, everything has a different. Dahmer was challenging just emotionally, but also in tracking, just in tracking where different characters were, and tracking kind of the story of black and brown men who had been kind of forgotten and ignored for so long. It was like trying to turn a story on its head, and so I think we all felt like an immense responsibility, and it was kind of intimidating because it's like we know what we need to do here, and just trying to figure out the best way to tell that story.
Get it across. Sure. You work with Ryan Murphy on that, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah, he's an amazing filmmaker. Some of his
Yeah.
work I love, but
Yeah.
Dahmer was a great show, riveting. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that one was, it was definitely, yeah, just back to your question, it was definitely a challenge, but I think, for that particular project, that was the challenge we knew we were coming into. On a show like a Black Lady sketch show, there's different challenges because every day you're cutting a different genre of television, and you just have to kind of bounce between those. And sometimes it might be a very improv heavy sketch, sometimes it might not be. So just kind of weighing those different things can be challenging. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would say each project has different things that are a challenge, but
Unique.
I don't know that there's any one in particular that stands out for that
Right.
reason.
Sure, sure. So considering these challenges, every job has, how do you stay creative and avoid burnout, working in our industry?
For me, I tend to jump between genres as much as I can, and I think that helps me a little bit with those feelings of burnout, because when I do the same genre back to back for a long stretch of time, I feel like that's where I kind of like stop feeling as creative. You kind of get into the zone of things and you're just doing kind of like a similar style, versus when you pop into a different genre, it's like, oh yeah, I have to like bring out this other part of my brain again, and
Yeah.
refresh this toolkit again. So it's to me, that's what I try to do, and I know it's not always possible to find another, like, oh, finishing this, say, comedy, like let me find something totally polar opposite of that. It's not always possible, but as much as I can try to, I'll do that, and it seemed to help so far.
Can you share an instance of a particular project where an assistant editor made a particular impact on a show you were working on?
There's a show, so Dahmer, actually, my assistant editor on Dahmer, Lyric Ramsey, was just did such an incredible job with the sound. We had like a lot of different ideas, and we kind of talked every single day about what those ideas were, what we thought we could do with the story. But there were certain sequences within Dahmer that I felt like she really took ownership of and just was, if she didn't have a sound for something, she would Foley it. She's like, you know what, I don't have this, but let me, there's one sequence where he's crushing pills in the bathroom, but she's like, I'm going to crush my vitamins in the bathroom and record that. So she kind of went out of her way and above and beyond to just make sure that all the sound in Dahmer was just like top notch in our episodes, and I really appreciated that on that show because so much of it did rely on sound.
Yes, temp sound has so become sort of the domain of assistants. Again, back when I was an assistant, it was just, you had one track on 35, for God's sakes. And now there's just so much that can be done. An editor can't do it because they're usually so busy dealing with the mountain of dailies. So I find that's a really key place where I find my assistants help me out.
Yeah, and sound is such a huge part of the story too. There's things happening in the background that might tell you or might inform so much more of what's actually happening in the story. I know for We Grown Now, we my assistant editors and I on that, we just built out because Cabrini Green had 16 stories. The towers were 16 stories with thousands of people in them, and so we spent a lot of time just being like, what would be on this floor? Like on this floor we have a fight happening. On this floor we have someone reacting to the fight. On this floor there's music playing. So I think that's where for me, like I've been just blessed with a lot of really amazing assistant editors, I think, over the years, but who are so good at sound and so willing to collaborate also on all those different ideas and aren't like, Steph, this is crazy. Why are you asking for this? But yeah, I've just been really lucky, I think, with some really great AEs.
How do you approach editing emotionally sort of based scene versus an action-packed scene?
Usually I try to get myself in the headspace for it. Sometimes it's not right away. I've had projects where I'm like, I know that this scene is coming. I know that it's going to be like emotionally trying. And sometimes what I'll do is like, I'll watch through the footage. If like, say, dailies come in, I'll watch through footage and try to kind of get myself in that headspace. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to set this day for the day that I cut this scene or this sequence, and I just try to like get everything else kind of out of the way so that I can like emotionally be invested in that. Sometimes that's harder to do. Sometimes you don't have you might be on a deadline where you can't give it like I'll look at it next Tuesday situation. Right. But usually I'll try to like give it the like space I feel like it deserves, because I feel like scenes that are super emotional like that, I just always like to approach it after having thought through all the possibilities, maybe.
Sure. Nuances and performance and things like that.
Yeah. And sometimes if it's like, say, if it's a documentary, you might have multiple emotional beats, but that are somehow maybe tied together in some kind of way. So sometimes I like to just sit for those. I would always just kind of sit with it as well, and just see if maybe there's a way you can kind of thread all of them together, or if there's something else in sometimes thousands of hours of footage, maybe there's something else that could help connect all these dots story-wise. So I think that's why I usually try to like give myself the space and time to really process. How about yourself when you approach things like that?
I'm a big procrastinator, and then I find myself with the pressure of, the time that I've left. I just do it, and I will go back to it, hundreds of times, and, just try to find all of the, the nuance and, the different ways you can approach it. A lot of times it's just not that complicated, because hopefully if you're working with like a great actor, first, let's say, and they've just delivered, you're just kind of like home free. And it's when you're dealing with people who are less, less experienced or what have you, that I think that cutting, complex emotional scenes becomes the real challenge. It's sort of like trying to get blood from a stone, right?
Yeah, definitely.
If you could cut any film in film history, which one would you cut?
Seven. It's one of my favorites. It's what made me want to become an editor, I think.
I read that you were really affected by the title sequence, and I
Yeah.
actually edited a movie by the guy who created that title sequence,
Oh,
Kyle
really?
Cooper. Yeah,
Oh, wow. I feel like I would just ask him so many questions. Like, tell me all the things. But that movie, yeah, Seven, I just love it. Maybe like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I love that movie. Or Star Wars. Both coincidentally cut by Paul Hirsch.
right, right.
But yeah, I love all those. But I think Seven is my would be my go-to.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I actually watched it a few months ago. Sometimes I just find myself going through Netflix and just going, God, there's a lot of garbage out there. And then, you go to the classics and you just kind of like get hooked into it. And it's just like, whoa, it's
Yeah.
still great.
Yeah, it definitely holds up. What about
Cool.
yourself?
Oh, geez, like Citizen Kane or something. I don't know. Just to be able to bathe yourself in those images for so long. Greg Toland cinematography is just a lot of times I just look, I'm a very visually oriented person and I just love looking at beautiful images. So I think, that would kind of like, plus the story of Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
I watched another show on Netflix recently, Ripley. Uh,
Oh, it's so good.
and yeah, the cinematography in that it's just gorgeous. And I just thought, oh, this just must have been a wonderful thing to cut.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. That show definitely made me want to go to Italy.
I always want to go to Italy, but yeah, that show just kind of reinforced that.
Yeah.
What are some of the common misconceptions people have about film editing?
Something that I notice a lot because my family doesn't necessarily always know what what I do is I think a lot of people think who are not in our industry think that editors or they think that the editing maybe happens when the project is filmed. So that it's like they might assume it's like, you shoot it and that's what you see. So that's one that I feel like I hit a lot. I always have to kind of explain explain to people that like no, they film it and then you put it together. You have like so much footage, you have to put it together. So I would say that is one that I see a lot. Also, just that we sit by ourselves alone in a dark room all day, um, which also isn't true because we are collaborators. We're kind of the final rewrite of any script. So much of our jobs as editors is like talking to the creatives around us, trying to collaborate and make sure that the story works, make sure that the edit works, whether it's your director, your producers, your assistant editors. So much of your job is talking to other people or you know, maybe you have like
Collaborating.
yeah, maybe you have like a VFX meeting, but you talk through story things there with those artists. Like it's all about just collaborating as a team to make a project come together. So I think people maybe don't always realize that about us as editors, not just sitting at our computer all day.
That's a good point. Yeah, most people would think that it's just us alone in a dark room. And a lot of times it is, but there's so much collaboration.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you handle feedback from directors and producers, let's say, to maintain that your creative vision is still represented without being overbearing or, politically dangerous?
For me, usually what I do, I'm better at like showing something than maybe even explaining it. So a lot of times what I'll do, sometimes there might be a note where I'm like, I don't think this is going to work. I'll try it just in the spirit of the note, but I'll also do a version that feels like maybe this preserves a little bit of what we had, but also addresses this idea. So I'll create different alts, just so I can kind of like A/B them with whether it's a director, producer, studio, anybody, just so I can say like, look, we did try this version, but there's also this possibility that I think we haven't fully discussed. But now that you see it, maybe we can talk about if you think anything from this works, or if you think maybe a mixture of both works, just to get that conversation going is usually usually what I try to do.
Right. That's a great approach. But what happens if like the director or the producer, quite often that happens with the producers, they just bring in notes that are just you think are awful and you really disagree. I mean, how do you handle that? Either internally or with the director?
Usually I always say I'll try it, right? Like I'll marinate on it. I'll try it and see, what see see if it works. Because sometimes, like, you don't want to be the person that's like, no, this absolutely will not work, and then you try it and you're like, oh, this fixed everything, and I have to eat my words. So yeah, generally I'll try it, or at least, I'll say like I'll look at it and see what we can do, kind of thing. But if I am in the process of doing it and I realize like, yeah, absolutely, this won't work, or just like I thought this isn't going to work, that's where I kind of create those alts, where I'll be like, I'm going to open up a conversation, open up a dialogue. Sometimes I'll even, call or text just to talk about, I'm working on this note right now. It doesn't feel like it's totally going to work. Is it okay if I attempt this as well? I think just as long as you're kind of transparent with it without just being like, this is the dumbest note I've ever heard. As long as you're a little bit transparent with it, I find that at least on my end or on the things that I've worked on, it seems to help.
Yeah. Yeah. What inspires you when you're creatively blocked? Do you have any like rituals or things you do to kind of like get your mind freed up?
Usually what I'll do is I'll go for a walk, and just like listen to music. If I can listen to something that feels like totally the opposite of what I'm working on while I'm walking, sometimes that helps just to get your brain completely out of that headspace, I guess. Because then suddenly, like, the answer that you're looking for might just pop into your head. So I'll do that a lot. I'll go for walks, or just anything to get me away from what I'm working on usually helps.
Yeah.
Or watching, maybe it's like, oh, I need to watch Seven, or watch a movie that is totally opposite of something maybe that I'm looking at, or call a friend or a family member, just have something that just gets your brain out of it.
Yeah, changes your frame of reference. Sure. Do you ever get? I've gotten the answer to a problem that I was working on during the day in my sleep. Has that ever happened to you?
All the time. It drives me nuts because I'll wake up at like 3 in the morning, and then I'm like, oh, I know what I need to do. But then you don't want to get up because you're in bed. But usually
Yeah.
I'll like write it down or mark something in my phone just so I don't forget. But yeah,
Yeah.
that happens a lot. Or if I'm just like if I can't sleep, sometimes it's like, oh, here's the answer for me.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. 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 And the taking a walk thing has always been like a great answer for me. My dad was a film editor and he told me that early on. It's like when you're stuck, just go walk around the block. And it works quite often. I mean, not always, of course, but it's amazing how just changing your frame of reference that little bit can really free you up.
Yeah, definitely. Or doing other art, even if you're like, I'm gonna do this other craft, maybe I'll learn how to knit today. And sometimes that helps because it's just a different creative thing for your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. But your mind is still creative. So that's
Mhm.
cool. Yeah. I don't have any other talent, so I'm in big trouble in terms of that.
I mean, I'm not a good knitter, but it has helped me sometimes in a creative block.
In a pinch. Yeah.
Hmm.
So you've done a lot of incredible social justice work. How does your activism influence the kind of films you want to do or projects you take on?
Um, I think usually the projects that I'm drawn to are projects that have maybe some element of social impact spin to them, or something that even, just has an underrepresented story or voice in it or community in it. usually those are the projects that I find myself drawn to just naturally. So I tend to focus on those. If they come along, they don't always, but sometimes you're like, you know what, this is a story I really want to tell. So I try to look for those in finding new projects. But also, if I'm working on something, I try to approach it from a lens of like what story are we trying to tell, but like ethically, what story are you trying to tell? You know, if you have underrepresented voices, you need to make sure that like the nuance of those voices is represented. You know, if it's, say, a Black lady sketch show, for example, you know, it's a sketch show. It's a comedy show, but all of these there's hundreds of different types of characters, different types of Black women, different ways you could cut something. So to me, it's really about finding what the nuance is in all of those performances and in all of those stories when I approach it. A show like Dahmer, for example, you know, I delved into just doing research, as much research as I could, because I knew the story from kind of the way that it's presented, which has always been presented since the 90s, is like this sensationalized version of events. But to me, it was just really important to understand like all of the sociopolitical aspects of what the story actually was and what was going on. And also, these are real people's stories. So making sure that like I felt like I was doing those justice and really thinking through ways to tell those that are as authentic as possible. That's kind of how I try to approach any project, no matter what it is. Even if it's not maybe something that has underrepresented voices, I still think it's important to be like, okay, who is this affecting? And you know, sometimes if it's something that doesn't have a social impact spin, you could still have that if you find the nuance in certain characters, or maybe there's always something that could help.
That's great.
Push that forward, you know.
Yeah. And you know, to be perfectly honest, I really only knew the sort of sensationalized narrative of the Dahmer story, and your series just it opens your eyes to a completely different perspective on, you know, like you say, the cultural and you know, the socio-political aspects of that, and it made it so much richer, you know what I mean, and more affecting.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm really glad that that came through, because yeah, it's very. I think anything with like real stories and real people is just so important to think about. You know, same with documentaries. Think about the ethics of something or why you're doing something. And there's projects that I've turned down where I have felt like I'm not the voice to tell it. You know, where it's, you know, I think
Right.
it's just important for us as editors, I think, to really think about these bigger, broader issues, not just the story you're telling, but what the impact might be, or you know,
Absolutely.
sometimes impact is sometimes greater than intent, you know, so you just have to really think about those aspects, or that's what I tend to do anyway.
Looking ahead, what trends do you see emerging in post-production and film editing that you think assistant editors should be on top of and aware of?
You know, there's probably a lot that I haven't seen, but I have seen, you know, I think the use of AI for like voiceover is something that I feel like I've seen more of. And that kind of started with, if you remember a few years ago, there was the Anthony Bourdain doc. That was the first time I had ever heard of them using that kind of a technology for it. And I know there's so many there were so many ethical questions around that. So I feel like that's the one that I've seen the most of. There's also, you know, going back to script sync, I think there's a lot of different AI technology surrounding script sync that I've seen coming up.
Have you used the new version that I'm not familiar with it, but I guess they say that there's some sort of AI integrated with it.
I haven't yet, but I'm curious, definitely curious about it. I think I just hope that AI is something that, or AI in post is something that can be used more as like a productivity tool and not as something that's kind of replacing assistant editors or replacing jobs. Because there's also, you know, a friend of mine worked on a project where all of their dailies were treated through, it was just through AI. You know, the dailies house just ran everything through this certain program. There wasn't a person or people kind of handling dailies. So it's like that in itself is getting rid of a certain number of roles on a team. You know, it's that kind of stuff where sure, it might be like, oh, this is a fast way to process dailies. But at the same time, there's so much value in people doing that. And so I think for me, you know, I'm not totally up to speed on some of the latest AI. I feel like every day there's something different. But I hope in post that it can at least be regulated to a point of like, you know, it's just there for productivity so that maybe AEs can focus more on the more creative side of things.
I think that is how it's going to unfold. I don't think you can remove the human element completely. And I don't think AI, you know, quite honestly, has the capacity, at least at this point in time, to, you know, take over the decision-making process that we have to make as assistants and editors. I definitely think there will be an assisting role, but if you think about it, I mean, you know, when I started out, we sunk dailies by hand. And then a certain amount of years later, when digital came along, that all left our domain. I mean, yes, on some low budget films, maybe people still sync dailies by hand, but most of the time it goes to a lab now and they send you an ALE. So, you know, not that that's AI, but it is, you know, transferring the work to someone else and to a somewhat automated system. And that's not to say there are not ethical concerns. There certainly are. But you know, there's this sort of fear factor that I think gets blown out of proportion in our industry. Maybe, you know, it's a little different for screenwriters. I mean, you know, AI can crank out a screenplay pretty quickly, but editing is different, right? I mean, it's really making those decisions at the end of the day really have to come down to you and the director and the producer and
AI can never take over like that creative collaboration that we have. Like that's what makes any project great, is that of it. So
yeah. Well, Stephanie, listen, it's been really great to talk to you, and I appreciate you giving me so much of your time. I hope it hasn't been too taxing.
Great.
Congratulations on all your fantastic work. It's really admirable to see someone sort of marry their passion for, you know, social justice and things like that with a filmmaking career, because you're working on, you know, big studio type films, big companies and things like that, but you're still managing to do really important work, which I think is so great.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I'm really honored.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.